Grant, do you want to get, Grant, are you doing the first agenda item, or Nick?
It'd be myself, yeah.
Okay, cool. Do you want to get going?
Sure, I thought there might be someone coming on to lead the meeting, but fair
Yeah,
enough.
yeah, I think yeah, it's a pretty informal meeting, to be honest.
Okay,
But
great. Yeah.
cool.
So it depends on the group really how far you want me to go with the toolkit. I know I'm pretty much preaching to the choir here. Most of my materials for people who don't even know what Terraform and Ansible is. So uh, it depends on what maybe it depends on what format you want me to go in. I can do a quick show you how a Terraform and Ansible works, but again, you probably have a general gist of how that works. So I'm flexible here how you want this demo to go. So what would be most useful for you guys, do you think?
I guess to start, explain what because maybe start with the real fundamentals of what the GitLab Environment Toolkit is and who it's intended for, and who's using it the most, and who you intend to have using it in future.
Yeah, so the toolkit was born out of a need in quality enablement to build out real environments essentially of GitLab to performance test. So originally it was called the Performance Environment Builder, very apt to name. And it was just a point where we were actually trying to design the reference architectures as well that we recommend to self-manage people. And so this is kind of a synced effort where we needed to build an environment to performance test to test the performance of GitLab, but we also needed to know what a good GitLab environment would look like, and then in turn, obviously, that if we design one, then that's the same one we'd recommend to customers. So all kind of synced into each other in a cycle. So we needed a way to build out and test the environments to actually find that they're viable. So we immediately looked around. We had one environment at the time which was built out manually, and we know that that wasn't going to be durable or scalable for us moving forward because we need different sizes and to update. So we started to build out what was meant to be a very, and it still is, a very simple or boring, I guess is the right term, environment builder that's meant to be as basic as possible essentially at its heart, as simple as possible, that will provision the machines we need and then deploy GitLab Omnibus in the right way in a multi-node setup for a GitLab environment that can perform at scale. And that is essentially what the toolkit is today. It's had a lot of tweaks and polish and various other things, but at its heart, that's all it does. It provisions machines, it takes GitLab Omnibus and pops it on a bunch of machines with the right config. It does do other things to support that, such as setting up load balancing and a few extra monitoring stuff that we needed for our testing and stuff. But that is essentially what it is as core.
Can I ask a question while we go?
Yep, absolutely.
So does it have options to use like cloud services for things like Postgres or Redis, or does it always use the omnibus version of those services?
Yeah, so this is something we're exploring now. Now that we're expanding the toolkit, it is today is used mainly by quality, and the Geo team are using it though quite a lot to help with their stuff because obviously Geo deployments are quite complicated, so they'll take anything they can get to make that easier. And we've been working with them quite closely, Nick has, to try and simplify that, and we're continuing to add more functionality, and they're quite happy with it. To answer that question, yeah, that is a question that we're expecting to get a lot more of. The goal of the toolkit, like I said, was to keep it as simple as possible, and adding customization adds complexity. So that's something we're very keen to try and manage and do in a considered way. That said, we have been asked about switching out components wholesale, essentially, and we don't support it today, but we will hopefully soon. It's something I'm doing a bit more polish with like adding docs for Azure and AWS and a few other little bits. And then the next big thing will be, okay, how can we add, I'm calling it customization hooks for people to do reasonable modifications to the process. And a reasonable modification I think would be switching out, don't use Postgres Omnibus, switch out for AWS RDS or GCP's variant, etc. That should be possible hopefully quite soon. But for you guys, if you're quite savvy, you can easily go in and change the config files yourself and do it. But hopefully we'll have official support for that soon.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do the solutions architecture team use this toolkit to build out like client environments, or they presumably they've got some tools around this that they use? I'm
Yeah, they've got a
guessing they
lot of
don't do things
tools.
manually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and are they using their own, or they're using this as well?
They're using their own for now. Again, we do want to roll this out for the wider user base for customers to use. Um, we wanted to roll out internally first and get feedback on that and go through that kind of development loop, and then we'd roll out to customers. Obviously, developing for just the quality team, which is what the toolkit was for, to then opening up to internal teams has taken a few months to get in the right place, because we had to move a lot of baked in, config. You know how it goes. If you build your own little tool, you build it for yourself, and then someone else wants to come along, you're like, oh, that doesn't really make sense anymore. And we've been doing that for the last few months, and the same process needs to happen for customers. For example, we only support Ubuntu today. And for most internal teams, that's probably fine. For customers, probably not. They probably want CentOS or another Red Hat variant. So we're going to go through that process. That'll be further down the line, but we're hoping this year at some point we can do that. We can get at least some kind of a release candidate out to customers. But yeah, so let's start.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
For the teams that actually deploy it for customers, I think I've actually had a quick look at their tooling. It's a bit of a Frankenstein in that they've obviously had to do it. This is the bigger problem and this is potentially the same for infrastructure as well. And obviously every customer has different requirements and different modifications and wants and needs and security considerations and everything else. And then basically each tooling is kind of went down that route of, well, this is for this customer and this is for this customer, and it's become obviously quite a bit of a hodgepodge. So the tool is meant to be just one tool, and we want to try and support general environment building, but we do want to add in those hooks to try and add in the ability to customize. But we're still feeling that out and how far we can support people with it while keeping the toolkit maintainable. But we hope to do it.
Yeah, because it's sort of like what we have with Omnibus, like for all its warts, is kind of great because everyone's kind of pulling the effort in the same direction. And it'll
Absolutely,
be really
yeah.
nice to have something like, a wider multi-machine deployment that's standard and obviously based on all the excellent work you did with the reference architecture and everyone kind of, but obviously I understand it's also super difficult because the customization is the really hard thing to get right there.
It's really difficult, yeah. We're going to try and be proactive and cut things off and try and cover bases, but obviously once it gets in the hands of customers, we'll probably get a lot of feedback about, oh, we want to do this particular thing and that. So what the general just today is, and we're still, like I say, we're still feeling out, is that anything that makes sense that can be applied to mobile customers or deployments, we'll look to try and add into the toolkit, as long as it's not like a maintenance nightmare. Or comes with a lot of debt. So like, yeah, for example, switching out Postgres to use AWS or Elasticache or something else like that. That's okay. That's a wholesale replacement of a whole component. That's maintenance wise. That's a conditional really in the end. So that's okay. We can do that. Doing other complex things, then yeah, that's when it gets a little bit question mark. But then, as you say, the big benefit of the toolkit that I've always believed in with these tools, because I've done it in the past as well, and so has Nick, is that when we have one centralized tool like this, we do unfortunately will have to say no sometimes to people. But the point is that we have one centralized tool that everyone should be able to use, at least for a base environment, and that means that they feed back into that toolkit. And then the things that we find that are hard to do with Omnibus in terms of automation, for example, then we can feed that back into the teams, and we can improve Omnibus, improve the toolkit, and then improve the experience for customers. So we're kind of wanting to do that same thing of having one tool, one single source of truth, does come with a whole bunch of extra benefits like that. So yes, that balancing act.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about how many customers are probably also building their own kind of version of this, and then just
Absolutely.
different teams at GitLab, and you kind of put all of that effort into a single effort, it would be way better.
It would be a lot better, yeah. For sure, yeah. Customers are definitely building their own tool, especially if they're building out a large reference architecture like environment. They are absolutely building, or we're building the tooling for them at the moment. And so this is where I mean, if we have one tool, then we can have more of a shared space for discussions and finding and exposing problems with the setup, and then we can get that back to the teams. And if we improve it in Omnibus, then it improves all the way down to the customer. So that's the overall goal. We hope to see that continue. But yeah, that's why the toolkit is. That's why we're doing this effort. It's going to be difficult, I'm sure, at times, but the effort is to try and give people one tool that they can start to all contribute to. So
Awesome, thanks.
no problem.
I had a question about scope and I'm kind of looking at this mostly from the infrastructure and GitLab.com perspective, because I'm seeing a lot of overlap between what we do and what this tool is doing. And it looks like, or at least it sounds to me like the tool is sort of aimed towards building out, like creating a new environment. And a lot of the challenges that we face on a daily basis in infra is related to change, like basically making changes, deploying new versions. Is that something that is in scope for this tool, or might get into scope for the tool in the future? What's your view on that?
So the underpinning of the toolkit is omnibus. That's important for numerous reasons. As like Andrew was saying, there having that pin on omnibus means that we're not going off piste and doing weird things. We're staying on track. We're staying in our lane, so to speak. With omnibus, we do support full upgrades. Anything that's updated in omnibus, the toolkit, you just run it again, and it will automatically upgrade the environment to the latest omnibus version, and with everything that comes with omnibus. And that's one of the big reasons why we base on omnibus. There's no point recreating what omnibus already does for us. So for infra, yeah, in .com, I didn't expect the infra team to knock on our door, so to speak, so quickly. I thought that was always going to be a bit of there's a lot of stuff we'll be doing that's similar, but obviously .com is a bespoke, unique environment with a lot of very customized things. So it's interesting to see that you guys are already one of the first to come to us. I know that you guys want to use it for maybe potentially staging secondary environments and stuff like that. And for if you're wanting to deploy a reference architecture like environment, then the toolkit can be used today. That's absolutely no problem. So yeah, we do support upgrades. And we do support. For example, the quality team, we use the toolkit every day. We have it in our pipelines. It updates for performance testing, updates numerous environments every day with the latest omnibus, and then we run the performance tests against it. And we've been doing that now for quite a while. So the upgrades are supported in terms of an omnibus upgrade. Yeah.
But is this upgrade without downtime? Like, would it support upgrades without downtime?
It doesn't support upgrades with downtime yet. That is obviously quite an involved and more difficult effort. We do want to look at it eventually, but yeah, zero downtime upgrades are also quite difficult, especially automation wise, because there's a lot of spinning plates and that kind of scenario where you need to keep things up and down, and that's a very involved process. But hopefully one day we will be able to support it.
Okay, cool.
I mean, Ansible has some tooling for that built in, right?
I mean, this is what we do for upgrades now. We use Ansible, and we do pre and post tasks for like taking instances out of the load balancer and putting them back in. This allows us to do no downtime upgrades, but we're finding that this is really not a nice way to manage a fleet. I think, we're all looking forward to moving the service or the front end to Kubernetes, so we don't have to do this anymore. I don't know how you would create a generalized approach to this, because every customer probably has their own way of like some customers are using the load balancer, cloud load balancer. Some of them may be using HA proxy. There's just like a lot of combinations of config.
Yeah, it's difficult. My confidence about zero time actually supporting zero time upgrades fully is not super high. We may be able to do the way that's expressly detailed in the docs, but then yeah, if a customer wants to go off piste, then I mean, obviously they can go in, it's open source, they can go in and crack open the toolkit and change it to what they need. Hopefully we'll be able to add in hooks to be able to do things, but like a zero time upgrades has a lot of kind of core movements that's required to make it happen, as you say. I mean, dabbling with a load balancer or creating some kind of crazy Ansible playbook that only hits different nodes at different times. And yeah, it's a big challenge, just like it is to do manually. So we will look at it eventually and see what we can do, and try and make it as easy as possible. But as you say, every customer environment is different. and sometimes
Right.
very, very notably so. So if a customer just wants to deploy a standard reference architecture and then walk away and be happy with it, then they will hopefully be able to continue to use Git, and then maybe we'll be able to support zero downtime upgrades of that. But if they choose to go off piste, they can use the toolkit to build out a standard environment. Maybe some of the hooks, they can add some good customization in there, but then yeah, it really depends on how far they want to go.
Great. Where are we in the agenda? What item? Or did we go through questions yet or not?
We're in agenda.
I'm getting.
Yeah, we're in
Oh,
questions.
okay.
I can go and do a demo for you, but like I say, I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys probably know more about Ansible than myself. So
I guess
I
like a small demo would probably, just to kind of get a feel. Like I just thought a few questions up front to kind of set the
tone. Yeah.
The tone, yeah. But a small demo probably. I don't know how other people.
I'd be curious to see it for sure.
Yeah, that's fine. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So very much by design, we have we don't have any. We do have one little script that can make the Ansible process a little bit more threaded to try and make it faster. But except for that, we use Terraform and Ansible commands. We don't do anything crazy or custom here. Again, that goes back to the boring design. We're not trying to do anything fancy here. It's just basics. Get Omnibus in the right way and let Omnibus do its magic, because Omnibus is the real star here. So for Terraform, and if you go through the docs, you through the docs, you'll see it there. But essentially, is set up the config Terraform, run it. Set up the config Ansible, run it. That's essentially the overall plan there. So
Franz, I'm not seeing any letters. I can hear.
Yeah, it's just a black.
Yeah,
just a black screen. We see your terminal, but it's black.
Yeah, my computer's been acting up a little bit with demos, unfortunately.
Yeah, Zoom's been doing that for me as well.
Has it? Oh, that's good. I thought it was just me. That's good to know.
And Jeff.
Yeah, you may need to log out and log back in and then reshare. That's what I do.
Okay, well, if you give me a minute, then I'll be back. All right, take two then. How's that looking?
Better.
Better. Okay, good. So yeah, it's just the basic Terraform and Ansible commands. I guess if for the toolkit, we have some convenience modules in Terraform to try just make it more easier to configure and to run them. I'll show you what our files look like now. So we tried to keep the Terraform, because Terraform, as you probably know, Terraform can get quite verbose and quite quickly and have a lot of files and different configs. So we've created modules to kind of take that away in terms of provisioning. We don't actually expect many users long term to actually be using the Terraform piece. Most customers will have their own cloud hardware and stuff like that, but we still provide it obviously for our benefits. But this is probably the main file here, and it's designed to be quite readable. We obviously behind the scenes have a module that this is a GCP module, so behind this we'll have a GCP module that sets up the instances and firewall rules and everything else. That's all put into its own module that you can see on the repo if you go and have a look. And the config for it is meant to be quite straightforward. So it just literally goes through. It says we want X console nodes, and these are the machine types. So this is replicating the 10K architecture, and yeah, so that's pretty straightforward. And if you do Terraform plan, it will just obviously go through those and set up everything it needs. It does set up object storage as well. Object storage, firewall rules, and GCP instances. The AWS and Azure modules are also existing. Azure needs a little bit extra, but AWS is there. They do a bit extra, completely dependent on what the cloud provider needs. Like AWS needed extra networking, for example, because that's just the way it works. So these modules are meant to take all that away. So that may not be so attractive to you guys because you maybe want to do a bit more customization, but that's what we're looking for feedback on. I could do a Terraform apply, but this won't change anything. But you'll see we have outputs at the end, mainly just the IP addresses of the boxes, and it goes through that. By default, we recommend just setting the state onto the cloud provider. We were going to look at adding in support for, or at least switching people to use GitLab because GitLab can support a state, but gets a bit self-referential at that point. You have to use GitLab to deploy GitLab, and it gets a bit weird, but it works, I guess. But it's just it's a thing you have to think about at least a couple of times to think it through. So you'd assume this point it would set up the boxes, and the boxes obviously just standard Ubuntu boxes, and they're just ready to go. The main probably where the more magic part, I guess, for lack of a better term, is for Ansible. We use dynamic inventories for Ansible. Terraform, the modules will set a bunch of tags on each VM based on what VM it is. So then Ansible is able to come in and identify that this is a Postgres. It even goes in and says it's actually the Postgres primary, for example, because sometimes I might need to do extra things there. So for like GitLab Rails definitely has a primary because then we use that as the deploy node, as it's described in the docs, which does extra things like migration stuff.
How does it know which one's the primary?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It will. So sorry, say that again.
How does it know it's a primary? Is that dynamically updated on the GCP tag somehow, or how?
So it will have it will have a tag that.
Yeah, but what if there's a failover?
So we got stung by this quite a bit
Okay.
back in over time. So for let me get this is actually the inventory here. You see things like Postgres primary. This is actually an overhang from the past. So in the past we had Redis, we had Rep Manager, and Postgres. For Rep Manager, you can tell it always make one the primary. So that made things a lot easier in life. That's not the case now. So in Ansible, if you go for the scripts, you'll see places where we actually will pull Patroni now and ask it for the primary. And then we use that to navigate the scripts.
Since console is a service, I think that's in Omnibus, and did you consider using like a console inventory? I'm sure there's a plugin for Ansible that can do discovery using console, and that would also allow us to like, dynamically update the inventory for if you're a primary or secondary database. You can it's a lot more flexible probably than using GCP tags.
No, I haven't considered that. It's an interesting idea.
That could work. I don't think is console service, or is console server an Omnibus service, or is it not, or is it just the client? Or it is, yeah. So that, yeah. So if we have console, which you need for Postgres anyway, I think, right? So yeah, this could be used.
Patroni, isn't it? Would we use it in normal Postgres as well?
It was used for Rep Manager and Patroni requires.
It's used for Patroni as well, yeah. What because console does is console's main purpose is for Postgres failover. What it does, its main job is to come in and update PG Bouncer's config and point PG Bouncer at the new primary when that occurs. That's console's kind of main thing, and it monitors Postgres to see when it goes down. Console's also used though for monitoring, and that's the other thing we use it for quite a bit, is to have Prometheus have automated targets to pull.
Yeah, so I think it would be a good fit for Ansible inventory, because I think you could enable the agent on all of the boxes, and then you can use console tags.
Which we do. The only issue is that it's a cart before horse issue. If you're building a new environment, you won't have console.
Ah, of course, yeah.
So that's why we don't do that.
Yeah.
If you add in a new box and stuff, then it's completely empty. It won't have a console. Whereas in the Kubernetes world and stuff, obviously you'd have pre-built images. So it's that kind of different way of thinking. Yeah. It's interesting though, because
sorry, I was going to say you could do something where you discover the console host, see if you can fetch the inventory, and then if you can't, you fall back to GCP. Like you could write a custom inventory script to do something like this.
Yeah, you could do. I mean, ultimately, what we will hopefully, when we start going down that path to support leasing toolkit to customers. We will go down that. We will need to explore those different paths of essentially your inventory can be whatever you want as long as it meets these X requirements. For now, tags I think will probably need to continue. The whole toolkit is based on tags. That's the way that people usually run Ansible, and that's what we've done. But when in the future, for example, customers might, and this will probably happen with most large customers, because they might not be, they probably won't be using cloud providers. So far, we've seen that they've been using their own hardware, so they'll need a static inventory. And in the static inventory, you can add as many tags as you want in the inventory. So you can mimic what we want in the toolkit. So that's where we're going to go with that. Console, in this context, is something to maybe explore, because we do need to know the primary. Sometimes we do need to know the primary node during the Ansible runtime. Like I say, Patroni is the one we had to work hard on. Nick had to bend over backwards trying to figure out how to pull and find it for Patroni. Can you tell us right now what is the primary? And the main reason for that would be doing the migrations. When Rails comes along, Rails will expect we get Rails 1, the primary, to do the migrations, but it has to do it directly against the primary, which is a very painful part of the process to automate. And with Rep Manager, it's easier because we could always expect Postgres 1 to be the primary, and with Patroni, obviously, it's not the case. So we've got it working now, and we actually are feeding back to distribution to make it easier to have GitLab CTL commands or other ways to try and pull and find out what the primary is. And we'll continue to do that, because like I say, this is where it comes in. Things that we find hard will be things that customers find hard, and we want to continue to improve it. Yeah, and so with Ansible again, it's pretty standard stuff. So yeah, we focus on dynamic inventories. But like I said, static inventory should be supported today. We just haven't documented what tags are needed on each box, but it's essentially what you see up here. And it's what's in the key groups. We have a tag called GitLab node type, GitLab node level, which would be node type would be Postgres, and level would be primary or secondary. That's essentially how it would work. And then we will build all these groups in Ansible, and that's how the playbooks will go through and run based on what's available and what's not. This is actually quite powerful, because we can base a lot of logic on simple things of if. So for example, the toolkit can build a 1K environment, which is essentially a single node. And then we're able to update the config files to say if Postgres doesn't exist in the group list, then obviously skip all this, don't do this, and add in some basic config in the single nodes context to make sure that the database is ready and running. So we are quite heavily dependent on this. So I think I saw someone else say that customers might be a bit funny about using tags. So that's something we'll need to think about moving forward. But at the moment, we're top to bottom, we're using tags. For playbooks, we have a simple playbook that's called all. I'll actually be able to show you it here. So it should actually just be here. And that just runs through it as you see in the standard way as defined in our docs and our reference architecture docs. Common, to explain some of the weird ones there, common is just the standard one that goes on and prepares you to install basic packages, and it actually installs the GitLab EE package without the environment URL. So the package is ready, but it's not actually configured. And some other stuff, Python and other things. And then it goes through each list. HProxy sets up HProxy, obviously, and the rest are just standard stuff. Elastic is something that's not in Omnibus. That's something we have added in with the toolkit, because that's just the way we will recommend doing it. We're actually figuring out if we can continue to do that with the license changes, but for now, it deploys Elastic and Docker images, and post configures that last piece where it will come in and do a few things. It will apply a license if it's available. It will apply some configuration changes over that can only be done through API, which is a bugbear of mine, but that's where we are. And it will come in and set up Elasticsearch as well, advanced search. So that's what it would do. I can literally show you. I can literally start playing it now. So this is with the 10K environment that we have, which is up right now. And obviously, because I'm doing it live, I've forgotten everything, as always the way. Yep, being silly. Playbook non-small inventory. There we go. We've designed it so that you'll need to know you need to make sure that if the environment is already running and it's already been run at least once, if you design it so you can go on and run each playbook individually, which in turn is a role. We've got some tags that ignore that. We've got some tags that allow you to just run. So, for example, we'll have a tag generally like reconfigure. We haven't documented this. We don't really call this out yet. We probably will do eventually, where people need to come in and do more admin tasks. So, for example, if they just want to change the config of a box and not do a full update and everything else, there's already tags in the toolkit that we can use, such as reconfigure as a tag, which obviously goes in and just does a reconfigure, maybe restart some things because we found that some things need to be restarted as well as reconfigure and stuff like that. So yeah, pretty boring demo, I'm afraid, but this is it running now, and I'll go off and do everything. Yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else to call out. Again, I say it's meant to be boring. It's meant to be pretty straightforward. We do, like I said, we do have to do some more advanced things like asking Patrons to find the Postgres primary. I think that's the only primary now that we need to pull directly. Gitly with cluster obviously has a floating primary as well. Thankfully, we don't need to do anything there, so that makes that process quite offhand, which is good. So that's good in terms of automation. GitLab Rails primary, we deemed the first on the primary, but that's just because we just need to pick one Rails node to do a few things like migrations and some other stuff.
Can I ask some questions while it's running?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
So the first one is, I noticed you have separate Sentinel clusters for each of the Redises. Is that in the reference architecture?
It is. This was recommended to us at the time we were building the reference architecture. I think it was a discussion with Stan. I think. Yeah, it was. Redis is actually one of the more complicated. Yeah. You'd opt against it. Yeah. So Redis is actually is annoyingly one of the more complicated parts of the setup. I always surprise me when I go in and see, for example, that 1K situation or 2K or other environment nodes. So it depends on the size of the architecture. For 10K up, we have separate Sentinels and separate Redis nodes with different queues. For lower environments, it's a combined Redis.
Okay, I know how painful it can be to configure Sentinel through Ansible or Chef, and getting it to configure can also be a bit of a pain.
It can be.
The second question I had was, and this is kind of very much like GitLab.com specific, or at least our use cases, but we have these, we call them shards or sometimes services, but basically sort of bulkheads between different workloads. So for Sidekick, we break the traffic up so that urgent traffic goes to one set of nodes, and we have CPU bound, and then we obviously split our web traffic between web API gets and our WebSockets, although WebSockets is on Kubernetes. Like, do you think it would be really hard to kind of specialize certain nodes, like to basically deal with web traffic, or one set of Sidekick nodes needs to be configured in this way and another set needs a slightly different configuration? Is that something that would be totally out of the question, or something that you could
It's not the question
through configuration?
It does add complexity, but it's not the question. So Redis have essentially had to do something similar there. Yeah. So like 1K Redis is obviously on the same node. 2K off the top of my head, I forget. But 3K is all one Redis, 3 Redis nodes and Sentinels. Sentinels and the 3K, I think, actually get put on the same nodes as console, just to reduce node count. So it's not the question. It does add a lot of complexity. I think when we were designing reference architectures, there was discussion about the separate Redis Sidekick queues. There was discussion about separating web and API traffic as well on Rails, because that's actually what was recommended as the big environment design before the reference architectures. I think on the whole, it was decided that that complexity is just not really needed for customers to worry about. It obviously is for .com, but for any other self-managed install, it's not really. For traffic, that's a load balancer configuration, so that shouldn't be too bad. For Sidekick, the way that we tackled Redis is that we actually just have different Redis types of tags and nodes. So it's actually in the right from Terraform, we'll say deploy a Redis cache instead of a Redis, so to speak. We actually just treat them completely differently, because that's the only way we could really have that kind of clean separation of concerns. So we can deploy 3K, which only has one Redis cluster, and a 10K, which has 2, essentially. So it is complicated. As I say, readers is actually one of the more complicated places in the toolkit, but we could do, if there was a desire for Sidekick, we could look at that as well.
I mean, would you probably find anything up to 50K, as you say, it's probably totally fine just running a single cluster with a single config. I mean, I don't know the kind of scaling problems you see at that size.
Yeah, and 50K, we've deployed a few customers now. I mean, obviously we're testing in a lab context, so we're not seeing the real life, situation. We try and estimate, but that can only go so far. For Sidekick, yeah, I mean, we've not had any feedback. We've not seen any need for it yet. Usually, if a customer's usage shape was to be quite queue heavy and quite Sidekick heavy, we'll probably at the moment just suggest more Sidekick nodes. We probably wouldn't go down the route of separate queues yet unless there was a really clear benefit. The only benefit I can think of is that if we see strong evidence that user patterns are these particular Sidekick queues are always very heavy. That's maybe when we'd maybe look at separate them out and say, okay, we'll create a Sidekick for imports or merge requests and handling pipeline running. But Sidekick for now in our testing seems to be fine with a kind of a vertical and horizontal scale, so to speak. But it's not off the table. We're always happy to look at it.
Cool.
There has been a little bit of talk of a 100K environment. I think one customer is potentially maybe going to go down that route, but we don't expect many customers into that size of environment. It'd be very, very little, and at the moment it would just be 50K scaled up, and we'd then see how it would perform, and maybe at that point we may need to start looking at breaking things apart. But
yeah, I think as well, when you get to that size, like it's very difficult to guess exactly what the workload's going to be like, because it's so dependent on what the customers are doing and whether they've got some crazy mono repo that has 10,000 CI jobs running, or
yeah, exactly.
However, it becomes very difficult to second guess the reference architecture.
So the reference architecture is a reference. It's meant to be a general architecture. As always, we'll try and, as for the process, this hopefully requirements for customers might come out, but these kind of things, you just don't know, especially when it's like a large environment. The bigger the environment, the bigger the number of users, the more varied the shape of usage will be. And one customer could be very heavy registry use, very heavy CI use, and another customer just might be completely just source control and issues and merge. But it's so hard to guess these things, so we don't. I mean, it's pointless to go on a futile exercise. We just try and create a good, solid base, and then we'll, for each customer, the point need to adjust as to go along. And through that process, we will look at, can we bring that back into the toolkit? Can we add that customization? Does that make sense? Is that maintainable? Will it add a lot of complexity? We'll be continuously doing that.
Cool. Sorry, I jumped in on the questions there. I think other people have got some too.
Yeah, feel free.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if this was covered earlier. How are migrations handled for the database?
So migrations, we follow the docs pretty much as those go. So let me see if I can actually get you the actual script, and I'll show you what happens there. So
well, maybe just to make this quick, like, do you just let Omnibus handle migrations, or do you do them outside of Omnibus? In other words, like, do you let the Omnibus run, like when you do a package upgrade, for example, do you, I think Omnibus will automatically do migrations unless if you set a flag to say skip. I think you drop a file or something to skip migrations, right?
Yeah, we handle it directly. So well, it's a mix of both. So we have we do expressly configure everywhere to say don't even think about migrations, because obviously the rule for migrations is it has to be one node that does it at one time, directly against the Postgres node. So that's what the GitLab Rails script actually does handle that. So what it does is that everything's configured not to do it, but then during the actual run of the Ansible playbook, it will come in and take the primary, which is always node 1 in GitLab Rails world. It will reconfigure it with a different config file, essentially the same config file, but with those extra little flags to say this time before migrations. As you see here, it will actually go, if it first goes off to Patroni and ask it for the primary Postgres node at the time and its IP essentially, and then I'll take the IP, put it into the GitLab Rails 1 node config, and then run a reconfigure, which during that it will do the migrations. This is very much a downtime upgrade, of course. We don't do zero-time upgrades yet, but we hope to do that in the future.
I see. So you get the IP of the primary, you configure a leader in your Rails fleet to use that as the database IP, and then you run the rake script to run migrations on that node.
We just run reconfigure.
Oh, you just run reconfigure and you set it so that does migrations, on the
as part of
yeah, I see. And this is done. And this is done on a leader after the upgrade. So it's upgraded to the new version. Then you do this reconfigure to run migrations, and then you continue with the rest of the nodes. Or is it done in parallel?
It does one first. It does the primary first. So everything else is already so in the run order, Postgres is already upgraded and everything else is already upgraded. Rails comes in and gets upgraded as well. The package has already been updated, and then it comes in, will do reconfigure Postgres 1, GitLab Rails primary, first, which in turn will also do migrations. And then it goes to all the nodes, including the primary. It does one first, and then the next step is go to all the Rails nodes, apply exactly the same config file, which would have no migrations, and reconfigure them all again.
Okay, so there is like a short window of time where you have the new code running, but you haven't run migrations yet.
There would be a very short period of time, yeah.
Okay.
That's something we can look at for sure as well. Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, I think it's more specific to no downtime upgrades, and you probably need to decide whether you want to support that sort of thing or not. Like that makes it very complicated. And for us, you know, I put some notes here on how we use Ansible. If you're curious, we also do post deploy migrations, which you pass a flag to your rakes command to run migrations to say skip post deploy migrations, and these are the migrations that destroy data, and we run these at the end. So we have like two migrations, one before the fleet upgrade on the lead on what we call a deploy node, which its only purpose is to run migrations. It doesn't receive any Rails traffic, and then we run post deploy migrations at the very end, which will potentially destroy data.
Yeah, I've come across that design where customers will recommend to have a node that just does just it's purely there just the migrations. We designed these to be lockstep with reference architectures. I always wanted to avoid a node that just sits there 90% of the time doing nothing. But I understand in terms of management that has benefits. So it's difficult. We're hoping for this we can look at in the future, maybe trying to drive an improvement to how migrations are done. But the design how we had to be, I think initially we did do the post deploy migrations and things like that. We found that actually a few times we actually got wrong and migrations weren't happening the right way. So that's when we moved it to this kind of design of let's just make it as simple as possible, downtime wise, and make sure they run and try and keep it as boring as possible. But we probably will need to look at this again in the future and look at a more specific approach. So
one thing you said earlier, you said you have Ansible get the Patroni the Patroni primary IP address, and you inject that into the Rails config and then do a reconfigure. Is that, did I understand that correctly? That you are doing this because the way we do this is we use console to like tell us what the master IP address is.
Yep. We don't use cons for that. We hadn't actually even thought far about that. I didn't actually realize. It makes sense. I forgot that console would always have the leader. So what we did with I worked with Nick on this. What we did is that we went to the distribution team and said, you need to give us a way to get the Postgres leader, or at least tell us a way. How can we ask Patroni or something like that to get us to tell us what leader is, and then at least then we can go off and use Ansible to try and get the IP. So it's actually there. There actually is a command now that's been recently added, which is called get Postgres primary, a GitLab CTL command, and we use that to get the IP address, and then put it into the config file, reconfigure, and then we reconfigure again, because then we also need to repoint the primary node to use PG Bouncer again, because
Right.
to do migration you need to point it directly, which I understand why is the deployment node being separate. That does make sense for migration.
Yeah, that's the advantage of having the separate. So we have our deploy node, which has the console address for the primary to connect to it directly, and then we never have to change it. So that's just convenient for us. But yeah, cool.
Yeah, something I'll reflect on. I will look at it. I just thought it was wasteful to have a separate node, but
yeah,
it is. Yeah, it's a really complicated area. It was one of the first big problems I had to solve with the toolkit. Yeah, and like I said, I got it wrong a few times because migration is just such an involved, brittle process. So for example, we had it going through PG Bouncer a few times. Obviously that started to fail because PG Bouncer is not good for that. So it's that learning process. So yeah, we'll probably need to look at this again.
Cool. Before we continue, can we just go through the questions in order? Because I'm not sure which ones we covered and which ones we didn't. Maybe Andrew, since you have the beginning of the questions, can you?
No, we've had those ones.
Okay, so which?
Yeah.
Okay, so number 3 is Craig, who I think had to drop off. He said, does this tool support Kubernetes? And I guess not, right?
Expressly no.
Not right now.
No, well, for now, today is a hard no. Just to be clear.
Okay.
The distribution team and the Helm team make the charts of Kubernetes. We're not going to go and recreate what they're already doing. Kubernetes, as you all well know, is not an easy platform to master in any way. It's a very complicated platform, yep.
I was going to say, but you could still have Terraform support for using cloud Kubernetes services, right?
So yeah, we can maybe eventually add Terraform provisioning support to support provisioning a cluster and things like that. But for now, we want to for now the clean kind of separation concerns is you can use the toolkit to set up omnibus based components. So we have recently and we have always looked at supporting it in such a way that you can use the toolkit to build out a Postgres node and a GitLab cluster and other stateful components, and then you can come with Helm with our charts and then set up the front end and point it to the back end. And we actually do support that. That's actually in the reference architecture docs, just literally added this week. So we do support that, but yeah, we're not going to try and recreate what the Helm guys do. You look at what they do, and they have a whole team dedicated to that effort because it's just a complicated situation, and the toolkit's not going to replicate that. Toolkit's here just to deploy on the bus. Helm is for Kubernetes, and if anyone wants to use Kubernetes, we point people to Helm because, yeah.
Okay. What about secrets for Ansible? How is that managed? Like, for example, the Postgres password and things like that. How are you configuring GitLab RB with secret values that you don't want to maybe check into your repository?
Yeah, this was quite an effort in the past to try and figure out. So initially, the toolkit was just for quality. So we had a private project. That's how we did it. We encrypted the files, and the files that had the passwords in it, in the Ansible config files. And that was fine for us, of course. But then obviously when starting to think about, okay, now we need to open up to all the teams, and that's literally what I've been working on in the last few months. It's like, okay, how can we make this work in at least a usable, friendly way to get people to do it? So how we do it is through inventory variables is essentially the bottom line there. So we at the moment, if you go through the docs, what we'll say is you should put your passwords in the inventory in the inventory file.
You mean like or I guess this isn't in CI. So you have environment variables that are passed to Ansible, right? That show up in the inventory, right?
So we have
something like that.
So today, what we have, and it is a basic approach, and we're more than happy to look at improving it, is that the toolkits project and repo are don't have any of this in it, which is good. Our quality environment config's in a different project, and we copy that in. in the CI. And in that project, we have the dynamic inventory. We have, and then with the dynamic inventory, you can add in other files that are classes inventory variables. And at the moment, we just seem to put the passwords in there and keep that file away in either encrypted or in a private project and keep that file safe. We could expand. You can actually take that. The inventory file is completely up to you how you write it. We obviously put the config that needs to be in there, but you could change that to be an environment variable if you so wished. Yeah, all that matters is that the variable exists in Ansible when it's run. How that variable is defined is completely up to you.
Sure. The next question is mine as well, which is, I think this has already been answered, I think, which is like whether we could use this for GitLab.com. One is that since there's no immediate plan to support Kubernetes, it sounds like it's probably not suitable for GitLab.com. For Ansible in general and Terraform in general, I'm not sure right now whether there's any use here, but like I think one of the part of the problem with like adopting your Terraform is that we just have like a lot of custom stuff that's probably unique to GitLab.com that other customers don't do. Even for our GKE Terraform config for Kubernetes, it's sort of like we divide into all these different node pools, and maybe we could share some of like our GKE module with customers. We have a compute module for Terraform that I don't know if anyone would want to adopt it or not. You know, like it's hard to say.
Yeah, it's difficult. We have tried to keep a clear focus for the toolkit throughout, and we're going to try and continue to do that because there's no point making a tool that can do everything, because then it'll become, a mess. It will become master of none, and that kind of situation. Whereas the toolkit is just expressly to deploy compute VMs omnibus. That's its purpose. We've got Helm, which is expressly designed to deploy Kubernetes. So we want to keep that situation here. We're not going to try and do one tool that does other tools' purposes when that tool already does it, especially when it comes to such a dedicated and bespoke platform like Kubernetes. From what in our experience, Ansible makes sense for configuring static VMs. That makes sense. Terraform makes sense to deploy to provision static VMs. Helm makes sense and Charts makes sense to deploy to Kubernetes, because those tools are dedicated to those equivalent platforms, so to speak. Ansible can do everything, of course, but then that's actually someone consider that a flaw of Ansible, that it can be so widely used, because then if you're using Ansible to run charts, then you get into you're getting into a less supported path, so to speak. Whereas we try to keep it basic. We use the tools that are designed for each platform to do the things that they're designed to do and they're good at doing. So yeah, it is difficult. And yeah, for .com, I don't know how far we can go to support that, because as you say, .com is a very unique environment. There's no environment like it, and you will need all these bespoke and little bits to support it. But as I say, we're definitely happy to look at adding customizable hooks and other ways to try and make the process customizable as far as we can go. But the toolkit has a purpose, and that's what its purpose is. We always want to make sure that the focus is clear, and the toolkit is generally quite lean. It does what it does. Helm does what it does, and that's the current goal.
Cool. Next question is Igor and Henry. Did you get the answer you wanted for that? Are they even on the call?
Board them away.
Sorry, where are we right now? I just got
6 in the questions.
That was answered already. I put Grant's answer.
Okay,
below.
great.
You can see. Thank you.
Number 7, Grant, is just a question of whether did you consider doing local Ansible runs, which is something you could maybe even run in your Terraform, in your Terraform config, instead of doing Ansible over SSH. I guess Ansible over SSH may be necessary for these more coordinated things like migrations. But was that a consideration you made?
It was very, very initially So the first thing I think everyone does when they first start Terraform is like, oh, can Terraform do configuration as well? And the answer is no. It's not designed for that.
Yeah.
Terraform tell you themselves, don't do this. There is the local execution provisioner in Terraform. The big, this may have changed, but not to my knowledge, the big thing to there is that it only gets run once. It only gets run on provision. If the environment already exists, if the node already exists, it won't run the script again. And it was just a very clear thing that you just got the message quite quickly with Terraform is that it's not designed for that. It's like what I said earlier. Terraform is designed for provisioning. That's its purpose.
Yeah.
That's its goal. Trying to bend it into their things, I've just found over time as I've designed these things, because I've worked with Chef in the past as well. You just learn. It's like, just don't bend it. Don't try and make it do something that's not designed to do, because then it just gives you pain at the beginning and then forevermore. It will always be a maintenance problem. Always be it just causes problems. So. We ruled it out because Terraform doesn't really support it, really, to be blunt.
Yeah, I mean, where I've seen this work is if you're creating an image pipeline where you bring up an instance once and you configure it once, and then you create an AMI in AWS or an image in GCP, and then use that in an auto scaling group or something like that. But I guess then it's like getting too complicated, or like you just don't have this demand from customers for this sort of like setup.
I mean, the auto scaling groups is certainly something we probably want to look at eventually. I have heard a few customers talk about that as obviously a much more simpler form of auto scaling kind of setup and handling demand. Obviously, as you say, it's a completely different approach, though. You will need to figure out how. Yeah, it's a completely different approach. In that we need to set up the image, and also then we need to try and figure out how the paths work in terms of, as you say, migrations and other things. So we don't support that today, and it probably won't be supported for quite a bit as we try and figure out all the rest of it. But it's something we might need to consider in the future. Customers keep come back to us and say we want auto scaling group support.
Cool. The next one is mine as well, which is like, I just wanted to give you kind of a quick rundown of how we use Ansible for GitLab.com. If you weren't aware, you can just read that if you have any questions. The next one was for console, which we already answered, and then migrations. And that's the end of the questions. Does anyone else on the call have something that we missed? Is there anyone else on the call? Let's see.
I just want to say that was a really great presentation. Thanks, Grant and Nick.
Yeah,
that was
really
really
nice.
useful, and really appreciate you coming on and talking to us.
Yeah, it's no problem at all. I'm more than happy to discuss all these kind of things. Yeah, but yeah, it's yeah, I definitely want to keep talking with infrastructure and .com teams and see what we can do to support. But like say that we want to keep Toolkit in its lane, and that means sometimes I'll have to say no, which is not a nice thing to hear. But like say we want to keep it focused into what it can do, but we do want to add that, if you want to reference architecture with, like I say, different provider, or you want it with you want to do something which is quite would be considered quite common. We want to support that kind of thing. And maybe eventually we have the token in a place where you maybe want to look at to deploy like a staging secondary or something like that. The going down different kind of paths is yeah, we just need to evaluate each one and make sure that we make sense for what the toolkit is, and then have that supported, and then support Helm, and then maybe I know OpenShift is being developed right now. Maybe we'll need OpenShift operator support as well. Again, same kind of situation. Obviously, OpenShift is similar, but it can also get completely different to Kubernetes, and it needs its own tooling because it's just such a vertical platform that needs its own dedicated stuff. So yeah, but I'm more than happy to come and chat, and hopefully this has been helpful for you. Any questions, stuff? I've linked some stuff in the agenda. We have got one issue right now where we're asking people to come in and suggest things about where would you want the toolkit to be customizable. We've already had some suggestions such as Elasticache, RDS, different OS support. That's something we know we do need to support eventually, and things like that. Switching it to load balancers was another request, and that's something we probably would look at doing eventually. Right now it's HProxy. In the future, we could probably bring in GCP load balancer, AWS, Azure. The internal load balancer is a little bit more complicated there, but hopefully we can figure that out. But yeah.
Thank you.
No problem at all. If there's no other questions, then that's it for me, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. It was a very great demo, and I think I just want to add one thing. By thinking about testing geo environments and seeing how we can test things in staging, I think one big topic I found is that it's very hard to stand up something like our GitLab.com production or staging environment, because getting up a new environment is very fiddly right now. It's not nice to do that. And Get would be a nice tool to stand up new environments very fast, right? The question now is, how can we meet in the middle somehow to make it easier to stand up new environments by getting still the features that we need and have in GitLab.com, right? So I think that would be the interesting future question, which isn't easy to answer, but maybe thinking about Kubernetes would be a way to, reach this one. So I think that's the thing to think about in the future.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Get doesn't support all the features of GitLab yet. There's reasons for this, like pages is obviously quite difficult to set up, although that's improving all the time, and we will look at that eventually. Registry again is quite difficult because it's part of GitLab. It's actually a separate deployment really, and has its own address and other things to do. Runners. Actually, we can't do because runners aren't automatable today. You need the unique ID from the environment and other things. It's a 4-year-old issue that we hope to be able to push and get that sorted out. So there's things we don't support yet today. We're always happy to hear requests for that. Come into our projects, come into our channel and ask about it, raise the issue. We can get upvotes on that, and we can try and see if we can get those in eventually. Geo, yeah, Nick has been working amazingly with the Geo team to add in that support, and you can stand up a Geo environment with Get today as well, and it can support upgrades, although we want to improve that a little bit as well. So if you're looking for standard environments that aren't like a .com, because .com's purpose isn't to run GitLab application per se. GitLab.com's purpose is to serve GitLab as a service to crazy amount of users all at the same time, which obviously is never going to be the same for self-managed. So there's always going to be that divide where we're going to have to try and figure out where can we bridge and what would make sense for us, and then what makes sense to .com. So the goal I think of Toolkit is to try and reduce like internal teams deploying development and test environments with all the own little tooling, and for customers as well where they only want a standard environment. For .com, I always expect that to probably have its own specific and bespoke tooling. You guys have a lot more things to consider, like SLAs and other things like that are obviously a lot more important. So hopefully we can continue to bridge, and hopefully you can get some use out of Get, even if it's just coming to see what we're doing and then replicating that on .com or talking with us and collaborating. We're up for all that.
I see definitely usages for Get. Like we could, for instance, use Get to instantiate a new environment for a disaster recovery side of staging, which doesn't need to look like staging exactly, but is capable enough to now run queries and keep all the data. And then we can use it to testing failover from one staging side to the other staging side in Get and failing back to test Geo, for instance. That would be one way to use it, I think.
Yeah, that should be if you're looking for just a standard environment for that kind of stuff, that should be doable today. Yeah, and the docs go into how to use Geo and stuff. Feel free to have a read through that, and as I say, raise issues or come through the Slack channel to ask about it. But that should be doable today if you're just looking for a standard secondary environment like that.
I was just going to add on that. It's just because it goes to what Graham was saying about adding more hooks, and I think the only small change you would need to make for something like that is, at the moment, for like a Geo deployment, Get needs to know everything about the entire deployment. We're reliant on, when we're setting up the secondary, knowing that the primary's IP address, the primary site IP address is this. So I think all we would really need to do for something like that is actually just allow those things to be overridden, so that you could actually just say, okay, you don't know anything about the primary, but here's the IP addresses that you need. And if we allow that kind of hook, then Get could probably quite easily work to spin up a secondary without knowing about the primary. The only things we couldn't do is, like, we do things at the moment, like we add the secondary as a secondary to the primary, like through the UI you have the geo nodes, so you can add a new one. We do it to a rate task on the primary site. We couldn't do that because we'd need access to the primary, but other than that, we could, with just a few IP addresses, we could probably hook up quite easily. So
Yeah, I think we will look into that in the disaster recovery group and see to make it work.
Yeah, that'd be absolutely fine. Yeah, we encourage everyone to you should be able to use it today, and that's the goal now. As I say, for like secrets and stuff, we have a separate project now for our config, and that would be the same design for everyone else to use. You should be able to check out, add a known config, and you should be able to just run it in theory. So, feel free to explore it and give us a shout if you have any other questions.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't think we can really talk about Craig's agenda item now, but it is interesting that it's also about Ansible. So I'm not sure if you're planning on joining the later call, Grant, but there might be some discussion there.
Unfortunately, I won't be able to. Yeah, it's way out my working hours, but I am interested in seeing that effort at a high level. Like I say, I've worked with Chef in the past, and for this tool, I dabbled with Ansible. I hadn't actually properly deep dived into it because I worked with Chef quite a bit in the last role, and then right at the end they did the license change bonanza that seems to be becoming more common, and Chef just went away. It died overnight in terms of the open source community. So I knew immediately, it's like, I'm not even going to touch Chef because it's just not possible. So I understand your want to move to Ansible. I found it to be quite comparable. Chef's has a bit more depth to it, I guess, in terms of being able to just run Ruby scripts and stuff. But Ansible you should be able to replicate. But yeah, I imagine that'll be quite a bit of work to do. So I'm interested to see how that goes.
Cool. Okay, I think that's it for today then.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Thanks for the detailed discussion.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks a lot. Bye.
No problem at all. Thanks now. Bye-bye.